Listen carefully because this will challenge everything you think you know about love. People say if they love you, they'll chase you. They say if they care, they'll show it easily. But when it comes to an avoidant, that logic breaks. Because an avoidant doesn't run from you, they run from what they feel for you, and here's the truth most people will never understand. The only real proof that an avoidant loves you is not how close they get. It's what they're willing to face internally because of you. Let me show you what that looks like. They tell themselves they won't get attached. They promise themselves they'll stay in control. For them, emotions are something to manage, not something to fall into. So they build rules, quiet, invisible rules that guide how close they allow themselves to get to anyone. Don't text too much. Don't open up too fast. Don't let someone become important. These rules aren't random, they're protection. They were built from past experiences, from moments where getting too close meant losing control, getting hurt, or feeling exposed in a way that didn't feel safe. And then you show up. At first, they try to treat you like everyone else. They keep things casual, controlled, distant enough to feel safe. But something about you starts to disrupt that system. It's subtle in the beginning. They catch themselves thinking about you longer than they planned. They reread your messages. They feel the urge to reach out even when they told themselves they wouldn't. And this is where the internal conflict begins. Because now, it's not about you anymore. It's about them versus their own rules. They'll sit there, phone in hand, debating whether to text you. Not because they don't care, but because they care more than they're comfortable with. Their mind says, don't do it. Stay in control. But something deeper pushes back, saying, just this once. And when they finally give in and send that message, it's not casual for them. It's a break in their system. A small rebellion against the walls they've spent years building. You might see it as something normal. A simple text, a small effort. But for them, it's significant. Because every time they choose connection over distance, they're going against their default wiring. They'll try to pull back afterward. That's part of the pattern. They'll feel exposed, maybe even regretful, wondering if they gave too much too soon. So they retreat, not because they lost interest, but because they're trying to regain control.
But here's the key: if they didn't care, there would be no conflict.
No push and pull. No breaking of rules followed by retreat. It would just be distance, clean and consistent. But with you, it's different. They break rules they don't break for others. They stay in conversations longer than they planned. They reveal things about themselves they usually keep hidden. Even in small doses, it matters, because for an avoidant, consistency and distance is easy. What's hard is allowing exceptions, and you become that exception. They might not even fully understand why. That's the confusing part for them. They'll try to rationalize it, tell themselves it's temporary, that it doesn't mean anything. But their actions start telling a different story. They show up when they said they wouldn't. They care when they tried not to. They invest attention where they once placed limits. And every time this happens, it shakes their sense of control. Because their identity is built on being independent, self-contained, not needing anyone. So when they find themselves bending those rules for you, it challenges how they see themselves. It forces them to confront a truth they're not fully ready to accept, that they're becoming emotionally involved. This is why their behavior can seem inconsistent. It's not randomness. It's resistance. One part of them is trying to maintain the old system, while another part is slowly stepping outside of it. And that tension shows up in how they interact with you. Close, then distant. Warm, then guarded. Present, then withdrawn. But underneath all of that, there's something very real happening. Because people don't break their own protective patterns for something meaningless. They don't risk discomfort, vulnerability, and loss of control unless something inside them feels worth it. So when an avoidant starts bending their own rules, even in small ways, it's not weakness. It's not confusion. It's a sign that something has gotten past their defenses. Something has reached a part of them they usually keep locked away. And they may not say it. They may not even fully admit it to themselves, but their actions reveal it in a way words never could. They are stepping out of their comfort zone, one conflicted decision at a time. Everything inside them is wired for distance. When emotions start getting intense, their system doesn't interpret it as something beautiful, it interprets it as something dangerous. Closeness for them has always been tied to a loss of control. So the moment things begin to feel real, their instinct isn't to lean in. It's to create space. That's why when you start mattering, the fear shows up almost immediately. It's not always obvious on the surface. Sometimes it looks like hesitation. Sometimes it shows up as mixed signals. One day they're fully present, engaged, almost surprisingly open. The next they're quieter, a little distant, harder to read. It can feel confusing if you're looking at it from the outside. But on the inside, something very specific is happening. They're feeling something strong, and they don't know how to hold it. Because for them, strong emotions come with questions. What if I lose myself in this? What if I can't handle the expectations? What if this ends and I get hurt? These aren't small thoughts. They carry weight. They create pressure. And pressure is exactly what their system tries to avoid. So naturally, the urge to run kicks in. They'll think about pulling away. They'll imagine how easy it would be to create distance, to go back to what feels safe and familiar. And sometimes they even try. They take longer to reply. They limit how much they share. They reduce the emotional intensity between you. But here's where it changes when love is real. They don't fully leave. Even while the fear is there, even while their mind is telling them to step back, something keeps them connected. They don't disappear completely. They don't cut you off in a clean, final way. Instead, they hover in this space between distance and connection. They might slow down, but they don't shut down entirely. They might go quiet, but they don't vanish. They might create space, but they still find their way back into the conversation, back into your presence. And that's the part that matters. Because if it was just fear, they would be gone. Completely. No hesitation, no return, no internal debate. They would choose distance every time. Because that's what feels safe. But when they stay even imperfectly, even inconsistently, it means something deeper is at play. It means the connection is strong enough to compete with their fear. And that's not easy for them. Every time they choose to stay, even in a small way, they're going against their natural instinct. They're sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. They're allowing themselves to feel something they don't fully understand or control. That doesn't mean they suddenly become expressive or emotionally open overnight.
That's not how it works.
Their version of staying might look subtle. It might be a reply when they could have ignored, a return after a period of silence, a willingness to keep the connection alive even when it feels overwhelming. From the outside, it might not look like much. But for them, it's significant. Because staying requires them to tolerate something they've spent years avoiding. Vulnerability, uncertainty, emotional exposure. And they don't do that easily. There will still be moments where the fear wins temporarily. Moments where they pull back more than you expect, where the distance feels heavier than usual. But even then, if the feeling is real, they don't stay in that distance forever. They circle back. Not because they're trying to confuse you, and not because they don't know what they want, but because a part of them keeps choosing the connection despite the fear. It's a quiet decision they make over and over again. To not fully walk away. To not completely shut the door. To remain even if it's not in a perfect or predictable way. And that choice, repeated over time, tells you something important. It tells you that what they feel isn't surface level. It's strong enough to challenge their instincts, strong enough to keep them engaged in something that doesn't come naturally to them. They are afraid, yes. That part doesn't disappear. But fear alone doesn't keep someone around. Fear pushes people away. So if they feel the fear and they still stay in some form, still maintain that thread of connection, still come back into your space even after stepping away, it means there's something in them that doesn't want to lose you. They may not say much, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening inside them. In fact, with an avoidant, some of the deepest attachment doesn't show up in words or obvious actions, it shows up in their thoughts. Quiet, constant, and often hidden even from you. When you start to matter to them, you don't just exist in their presence, you start existing in their mind. And that's where things become real for them. Because avoidant processes emotions internally before they ever express them externally. They don't react in the moment the way others might. Instead, they take things in, store them, and revisit them later when they're alone, when there's no pressure, no expectations, no need to respond instantly. So a simple conversation you had?
They replay it. A small detail you mentioned, they remember it.
The way you reacted to something? They analyze it. It's not overthinking in a chaotic way. It's more controlled, more quiet, almost like they're trying to understand what they're feeling without fully letting themselves feel it all at once. And that's why you might not always see the impact you're having. Because while you're wondering if they care, they're sitting somewhere alone, going over your words, your tone, your energy, trying to make sense of why you affect them the way you do. They might not text you immediately. They might not respond with emotional depth in real time. But later, when everything is still, your presence lingers in their mind in a way they can't easily switch off. You become a reference point. They compare other interactions to how they feel with you. They notice the difference, even if they don't say it out loud. Conversations with others might feel easier, lighter, less complicated, but also less meaningful. And that contrast quietly pulls them back toward you, mentally if not always physically. Sometimes they'll find themselves thinking about reaching out, even when there's no clear reason to. Not because something happened, but because you crossed their mind in a way that feels persistent. They might pick up their phone, type something, then delete it. Not because they changed their mind about you, but because expressing it still feels unfamiliar. That hesitation doesn't mean absence of feeling. It often means the opposite. Because if you didn't matter, you wouldn't stay in their thoughts at all. There would be no replaying, no analyzing, no internal conversations about you. You would simply fade into the background like everyone else they don't feel connected to. But when you're in their head, it's different. They start noticing things that remind them of you. A phrase someone uses, a situation that mirrors something you talked about, even a random moment that triggers a memory of your interaction. These aren't loud realizations. They're subtle, almost automatic. And over time, that mental presence builds something deeper. Because while they're keeping distance externally, internally they're forming a connection that's harder to break. The more they think about you, the more familiar you become in their inner world. And familiarity for an avoidant slowly turns into a form of comfort, even if they resist it at first. That's why they might seem detached on the outside but still stay mentally connected. They don't need constant communication to feel something. In fact, sometimes distance gives them more space to process, to reflect, to realize what you mean to them without the pressure of immediate interaction. And in that space, your presence often grows stronger, not weaker.
They start to understand you in their own way.
They piece together your personality, your patterns, your intentions not through direct emotional conversations, but through observation and reflection. It's slower, less visible, but often more deliberate. And once someone becomes a consistent part of their thoughts, it's not easy for them to let that go. Because it's not just about missing you in the moment. It's about how naturally you've integrated into their mental world. How your presence lingers without effort, without force. They may not always show it, and they may not always act on it immediately. But if you're living in their mind like the tiff, they keep returning to thoughts of you without trying to. You've crossed a line that most people never reach with them. You've become someone they carry with them even in silence. They don't sit down and decide, I'm going to test this person today. It doesn't work like that. What looks like testing from the outside is actually something much deeper and more automatic. It's a response driven by uncertainty, by a need to feel safe without directly asking for reassurance. Because asking directly would require vulnerability. And that's exactly what they struggle with. So instead, their behavior creates situations that quietly reveal how you'll respond. They might pull back a little, not to punish you, but to see what happens when they're less available. Do you chase them? Do you panic? Do you become emotional in a way that feels overwhelming to them? Or do you stay steady, grounded, unaffected in a healthy way? They notice all of it. Not in an obvious confrontational way, but internally they're observing. They're trying to understand if being close to you will feel safe or suffocating. Because for them, the fear isn't just about getting hurt. It's also about losing their sense of independence, their space, their control. So when they create a little distance, it's like they're stepping back to evaluate the situation. If you react with intensity, constant messages, emotional pressure, demands for reassurance, it confirms their fear. It tells them that closeness might come with expectations they can't meet, and that pushes them further away. Not because they don't care, but because it starts to feel overwhelming. But if you respond with calmness, with self-respect, with emotional balance, something shifts in them. They begin to feel a sense of relief, because now the connection doesn't feel like a threat. It doesn't feel like something that will take away their freedom or force them into emotional territory they're not ready for. Instead, it starts to feel manageable, safe even. And that's what they've been looking for all along, even if they didn't know how to ask for it. Sometimes the test isn't about distance. It might show up as inconsistency. One moment they're warm and engaged. The next they seem distracted or less present. Again, this isn't random. It's a way of seeing how stable the connection is when it's not perfect. They're asking without words, will you only be okay when everything feels good, or can you handle the natural ups and downs without losing yourself? Because deep down, they're trying to avoid situations where emotions become chaotic or unpredictable. They might also share something small and personal, then watch your reaction closely. Not because they want to impress you, but because they're measuring how safe it feels to open up. Even just a little. If your response feels judgmental, dismissive, or overly intense, they'll likely retreat and close that door again. But if your response feels calm, understanding, and grounded, it builds something important in them: trust. And trust for an avoidant isn't built through big gestures or dramatic moments. It's built through these small, quiet observations over time. The key thing to understand is that they're not testing your worth. They're testing their own safety around you. They're trying to answer questions they don't even say out loud. Can I be around this person without feeling pressured? Can I be myself without being overwhelmed? Can I take space without losing the connection completely? And your reactions become the answers. That's why their behavior can feel confusing. Because they're not explaining what they're doing. They're not saying, I need to know if you're emotionally stable, or I need to feel safe before I open up. Instead, they create situations where your natural response reveals that for them. And over time, those responses shape how they feel about you. If they consistently feel that you bring calm instead of chaos, stability instead of pressure, they begin to lower their guard. Slowly, carefully, but genuinely. They stop needing to create as many of these situations because they already have their answer. They feel safer. And when an avoidant starts to feel safe, something changes. The distance becomes less necessary. The hesitation becomes less intense. The connection starts to feel like something they can handle, not something they need to escape from. But it all begins with those unspoken tests, those quiet moments where they step back just enough to see what you'll do. Not to push you away, but to understand if staying close is something they can trust. They're not the kind of person who opens up easily. In fact, most of the time they've trained themselves not to. Emotions for them are something to keep contained, controlled, and carefully managed. So when it comes to vulnerability, you won't see big, dramatic expressions. You won't hear long emotional speeches or deep confessions poured out all at once. That's not how they operate. Instead, what you get are small openings. Moments that seem almost casual on the surface, but carry more weight than they let on. It might be a simple sentence about their past. Something brief, almost brushed off, like it doesn't matter much. But if you really listen, you realize it's something they don't usually share. Something personal. Something that reveals a layer beneath the surface they normally keep hidden. And then they move on quickly as if nothing happened. That's intentional. Because for them, staying too long in that vulnerable space feels uncomfortable. So they give you a glimpse, just enough, and then they pull back to regain their sense of control. It's not that they regret sharing it, it's that they're not used to being seen in that way. And that's what makes these moments so important. They don't give them to everyone. With most people, they keep things light, surface level, easy to manage. Conversations stay safe, predictable, emotionally neutral. There's no risk in that, no exposure, no chance of feeling too seen or too understood. But with you, something shifts. They start letting small truths slip through. Not all at once, not in a way that feels overwhelming, but gradually. A comment here, a story there, a moment where they reveal how they actually felt about something instead of just brushing it off. It might not seem like much if you're expecting obvious emotional depth, but for them, it's significant. Because every time they share something real, they're stepping outside of their comfort zone. They're allowing you to see a version of them they usually keep protected. And that's not easy. It requires trust, even if they don't fully realize it themselves. What's interesting is that these moments often come when they feel relatively safe and unpressured. When the conversation flows naturally, when there's no expectation for them to open up, when they don't feel like they're being pushed into vulnerability. That's when it happens most authentically. It slips out, almost unexpectedly. And if your response feels calm, understanding, and non-intrusive, it reinforces something important for them. It shows them that opening up doesn't automatically lead to discomfort or loss of control. That it can be received without pressure, without judgment, without turning into something overwhelming. That's how the pattern slowly builds. They share a little.
They observe your reaction.
They feel slightly more comfortable. And then over time, they share a little more.
It's not linear.
There will be moments where they open up, followed by periods where they become more reserved again. That doesn't mean they're closing off permanently. It just means they're regulating their own comfort level, making sure they don't go too far too fast. Because for them, vulnerability isn't something they rush into. It's something they approach carefully, in small, controlled steps. And each of those steps matters, because behind every small admission is a bigger truth there, starting to trust you with parts of themselves they don't usually expose. Parts that feel sensitive, private, and sometimes even confusing to them. They may not label it as vulnerability. They may not even recognize how meaningful those moments are. But their behavior shows it. They're letting you in, just enough to see what it feels like. And if that experience feels safe, if it feels manageable, if it doesn't lead to pressure or emotional overwhelm, it creates space for something deeper to develop. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. Because for them, real connection isn't built through grand emotional displays. It's built through these quiet, rare moments where they choose, even briefly, to lower their guard and let you see something real. Distance is their comfort zone. It's where they feel in control, where emotions don't overwhelm them, where nothing feels too intense or unpredictable. So when they create space, it's not unusual. It's familiar. It's how they regulate themselves when things start to feel like too much. And at some point, they almost always step back. It might happen after a deep conversation, after a moment of closeness, or even when everything seems to be going well. From the outside, it can feel sudden, confusing, even frustrating. You might wonder what changed, what you did wrong, why they pulled away just when things felt right.
But for them, it's not about something going wrong.
It's about things starting to feel real.
And real for them comes with weight, with vulnerability,
with the possibility of losing control. So they step back not necessarily to leave, but to create breathing room, to process what they're feeling without the pressure of being fully present in it. Now here's where the difference shows. If what they felt wasn't deep, if the connection didn't truly matter, that distance would turn into silence. Permanent, clean, uncomplicated silence. They would stay in that space and move on because nothing would be pulling them back. But when the feeling is real, distance doesn't feel as comfortable as it usually does. Something lingers. Even when they're not talking to you, even when they've created space, there's a part of them that stays connected. They think about you in moments they didn't expect. They feel the absence more than they thought they would. The silence isn't as peaceful as it used to be. And that's what starts pulling them back. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. They might check in with a simple message. Something casual, almost neutral, as if they're testing the waters again. Or they might respond to something you said earlier, picking up the connection without addressing the distance directly. It can seem small, almost insignificant, but it's not. Because coming back requires them to move against their own instinct again. The same instinct that told them to create distance is now being challenged by something else, something that doesn't feel settled without you in their space. And this doesn't just happen once. It becomes a pattern. They pull away when things feel intense. They create space to regain control. But then after some time they return. And every time they come back, it tells you something important. Because leaving is easy for them. Staying away is easy when there's no real attachment. But returning, choosing to reconnect, to re-engage, to step back into something that made them uncomfortable, that takes something more. It means the connection didn't fade during the distance. It means you remained present in their mind. It means the space they created didn't replace what they felt. In fact, sometimes the distance makes it clearer. Because when you're not there, they get to experience what it's like without the connection. And if that absence feels noticeable, if it creates a kind of quiet pull back toward you, it becomes harder for them to ignore what they're feeling. They may not articulate it like that. They may not even fully understand it, but their actions reflect it. They come back, not perfectly, not always in the way you expect, but consistently enough that it forms a pattern you can't ignore. And over time, that pattern reveals something deeper than words. It shows that no matter how much they try to manage their emotions through distance, there's something about you that doesn't fully let them disconnect. Something that keeps drawing them back into the connection, even when it challenges their comfort zone. Because if it didn't matter, they would have stayed gone, but they didn't. At the end of all this, you have to stop looking for love in the obvious places. With an avoidant, love is not loud, it's not constant, and it's definitely not easy to recognize if you're expecting traditional signs. What you're witnessing isn't a lack of feeling, it's a different way of experiencing it. Their love shows up in resistance and hesitation in the quiet decisions they make when no one is watching. It shows up in the moments where they go against their own instincts, even if just slightly, just briefly. And if you're not paying attention to those subtle shifts, you'll completely miss what's actually happening beneath the surface. Because the truth is, an avoidant doesn't prove love by moving toward you effortlessly. They prove it by what they're willing to struggle through internally. Every time they break their own rules, every time they stay when fear tells them to leave, every time they let you exist in their thoughts or reveal something personal, they are stepping outside of a system that once kept them safe. That's not small.
That's not accidental.
That's a sign that something inside them is changing, and that change doesn't happen for just anyone. But here's where you need to stay grounded. Just because someone feels something deeply doesn't automatically mean they're ready to give you what you need. Their internal battle is real, but it's still their responsibility to grow, to communicate, and to meet you in a healthy way. Recognizing their feelings should not mean ignoring your standards. Understanding their patterns should not mean losing yourself trying to decode them. There has to be balance. You can see the truth of what they feel without excusing behavior that leaves you confused or unfulfilled. What matters is clarity. Not the kind that comes from their words, because they may never say everything you want to hear, but the kind that comes from consistent patterns over time. Do they keep choosing the connection even after distance? Do they keep finding their way back even when it would be easier not to? Do they slowly, even if imperfectly, allow more of themselves to be seen? Those are the signals that carry weight. Not promises, not intensity, but repeated actions that reveal what's happening underneath their guarded exterior. And when you finally understand this, everything shifts. You stop chasing obvious validation and start recognizing deeper truth. You stop reacting to every pullback and start seeing the pattern behind it. And most importantly, you stop questioning your worth based on how loudly someone expresses love, and instead focus on whether their actions over time align with something real, something consistent, something that's actually growing. Because in the end, real love isn't just about what someone feels, it's about whether that feeling is strong enough to